But now let's go over to Stan in the radio booth. Stan?
Thanks, Ann. I'm here with Loren Wood, a teacher at Bloomington's New Tech High School. Thanks for being here.
Yep, you're welcome.
I want to talk to you about some things that you guys are doing absent the funding formula to try and get away from thinking about how do we improve test scores, which is the focus of things like No Child Left Behind, and the new innovative programs you guys are able to embark on to try and improve students. Are there a couple that come to your mind that you guys are really excited about?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, I mean, clearly projects is something that we do very different from traditional schools, in that almost all of our curriculum is through sort of authentic contextualized projects, frequently interdisciplinary. In fact, some of our classes are interdisciplinary. The American Studies class is a combination of English and American history. I teach both algebra and geometry currently, and almost all the curriculum in both of those classes is taught through projects. So that's a big difference from traditional classrooms.
One of the changes that's also been talked about, in addition to the funding formula, is changing the way that teachers are licensed in Indiana. Superintendent Tony Bennett has proposed bringing in professionals in other parts of the business and academic worlds and making them teachers in Indiana. Is that something that an educational formula like New Tech's would support, or something that you as a teacher do you think would support?
Well, I think that's a really tough question. I definitely think that having some work experience outside of academia can be really valuable, and you can leverage a lot of that experience in the classroom. But I do think that there's a lot to be said for preparation in terms of being a quality teacher, and it sounds to me like what they're saying at the state level is that subject area expertise counts for everything, and sort of pedagogical knowledge that is coming out of the teacher ed programs isn't necessarily that important, and I totally disagree.
Well, what do you think students need more of in just our last few seconds here? Do you think they need more of the traditional teaching model, which teaches teachers how to deal with students and how to communicate more effectively, or do we need, in order to keep up with the test scores and the educations that are going on, especially in places like China and India, do we need people who are very concerned about their individual subject areas and might be experts in those areas to communicate, here's the school of hard knocks, and you need to learn these facts and you need to learn them to keep up?
I think we need both of those things, and I think in order for teachers to do both those things, I think they need a strong subject area background, but I think that they also need a lot of support and training in terms of how to teach kids, how to connect with kids, how to deliver that material, because you can be an expert, but if you can't speak to kids about that material, then I think that you're going to do a pretty horrible job.
Loren Wood is a teacher at Bloomington's New Tech High School. We thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
We have a quote right now from State Senator Vi Simpson, and then back to Ann in the studio.
It does matter how much money we put in, but once you determine what you're able to afford as a line item in the budget, then you set that aside, and then you have the discussion about the formula itself and how the money is distributed. And that, in some ways, is even more important.
Let's start the discussion with Gerardo. Gerardo, coming out, I want to ask you two questions. The first one, coming out of that actual quote from Vi Simpson, from a higher education philosophy, looking at this now and the funding formula and the problems that the state is going through, how do you see it?
Well, clearly this was a very difficult budget year for everyone, including higher education. Fortunately, with the stimulus funding made available through the federal government, we saw a very small increase in K-12 education, but at least not a decrease. But there were some areas within the K-12 educational system that were cut that I think would be very important to replace in the future. One of those is professional development for teachers. Clearly, teachers need to continue to prepare themselves and stay up with the technology, with the changing demographics, with all the things that impact education, and it's very important that funding be replaced in the future. The other area that did not see any increases this year was early childhood education. And we know from all that research and all that we've been able to do that an investment in early childhood education pays dividends in terms of better performance in middle school, high school, and even college preparation and attendance. So I think there's some good things that we were able to do and prevent a real disaster, but there are some real concerns.
Okay, let's move off of that. Matt, what do you think about changing the formula? I mean, do we have to do this in the next 2 years?
Well, I agree with Senator Simpson that if you could find a way outside of the heat of the debate on what the formula is going to be and how it impacts individual schools, if we kind of in a stepping back in a more neutral atmosphere get down to a formula where you could just plug in the numbers each year once you've determined the overall amount of funding, that would be a good thing. And so I totally support Senator Simpson and her efforts, and I think it's great that she's taking the lead on that. The question is, can you really find that kind of out-of-the-box formula where you can just plug the numbers in that's going to help all the schools? Because if you have a lot of money, if you have surpluses, it's very easy. You just spread more money around. When you have limited amount of money, now you have to make choices, and you're going to hurt either urban schools and rural schools with stable or declining enrollments, while you're helping suburbans that are having growing number of students, or it's going to be the other way around. And so that's the fundamental problem. If you had an unlimited amount of money, or at least enough money, you could take care of everyone and we wouldn't be having these battles. But as long as there's less money than we really need, it's going to be a battle over that formula.
Okay. Tim, Vi actually mentioned that she would like to have you on this committee that she's talking about in the next 2 years. What kind of suggestions would you make?
Well, speaking from the perspective of Monroe County Schools, we see still some inequities in the formula that aren't accounted for solely by the complexity index. And the complexity index is a portion of the formula that says communities and schools with greater levels of poverty should receive proportionately greater funding. And we're certainly supportive of that concept. There are a wide variation in poverty among communities in Indiana. But at the same time, we're seeing some inequities in the formula that go beyond the differences in the poverty level between communities. And so one of the things we'd like to see is try to get to a formula that starts from everyone being equal and then making adjustments for poverty, school size. There's a feature now that provides some additional funding for small school corporations, and there's certainly some evidence to support that makes sense, but we'd like to see everyone equalized to start with and then make the adjustments that are necessary for differences in poverty levels and size of the school corporation.
Gerardo, I wanted to kind of come back to talking about what we should be focusing on in terms of our schools. Should we be looking at alternative education? Should we be focusing, as Senator Simpson said at the beginning of the show, really focusing on our public education? You know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think a strong system of public education is central to our democratic way of life. It's essential. Within that, I think there are possibilities to increase options, magnet schools, even charter schools, which are a form of public education. I think we need to look for ways to prepare teachers in alternative ways to work in different kinds of schools. There are schools within schools. So I think increasing options is a good thing, but we always have to attend to quality. And that's what I'm afraid is being lost, for example, in the teacher preparation and teacher licensing debate. It has been framed as a debate between content versus pedagogy. But the reality is that some of those proposals would actually decrease the content as well as the pedagogy that teachers are now required to have.
We'll get to that more in just a few minutes. Now we're going to go to Stan in the radio booth again. Stan?
Thanks, Ann. I'm on the phone with Brian Smith. He's the superintendent of Hamilton Southeastern Schools, which covers Fishers and other areas northeast of Indianapolis. Thanks for being with us. I want to ask you, first of all, your school district has filed a lawsuit recently with a Chicago law firm to help you fight Indiana's funding formula. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you filed that lawsuit in the first place? Mr. Smith, are you there? Afraid we're having a couple of technical difficulties with Mr. Smith. Why don't we go back to Ann in the studio with Dean Gonzalez and with Matt Pierce and with Tim Thrasher.
All right, thanks a lot, Stan.